Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. This is Lori Smith on Blog Talk Radio. It is 6 o'clock here in the morning, Calgary, Alberta, and it's Friday morning, August the 27th. I'm happy to be here. This is One Child Abuse Survivor to Another, 30-minute live internet streaming radio broadcast from blogtalkradio.com. And, I'm glad to be able to do these shows and continue on. And all week we've been looking at toxic shame, and mainly from a website that a lady has created some web pages to do with John Bradshaw's book, Healing the Shame That Binds Us. I need to get the right title for that book. But anyway, I haven't read the book, and I'm going to read the book. It seems like such good information, especially for people who have survived child abuse, right? So this is what we're talking about, these web pages that I found, and we'll just continue looking at that, probably, maybe finish it up Monday morning or Tuesday morning, and but it's good information, and I hope you're finding it helpful. I know I am. So we'll continue looking at that. I'm not a counselor or a therapist. I don't hold any certificates in those areas. I'm just a private person who does my own blog talk shows, and just to get more information out to people, as I find this information very helpful for myself as a survivor of child abuse and domestic violence. The issues that surround that whole thing, and growing up that way, right? I find this information very helpful. It helps me to sort out my thinking and my feelings on certain things, and I didn't even really know what shame was. I've heard the words, shame on you, of course, over in my lifetime many times, or shame on your behavior, your behavior is shameful, these type of things, right? But I never associated shame as being something that I would be feeling. I always thought that I was just angry about the abuse that I suffered as a child, and raging and feeling bad about it, but I didn't realize it was shame. So it's quite interesting. I always kind of took offense when somebody would say, "Oh, you must be so," the shame that you must carry, right, as a survivor of child abuse. And I always think, well, it's not my shame, and because that's very true. So somewhere inside of me, I recognize that shame is not mine. It doesn't really belong to me. It belongs to the abusers, right? So I'm glad that I was able to understand that, right? That's so important, right? This is not our shame. The shame should be put where it belongs, and that's on the abusers. So my shows are very sensitive, and I think everyone should listen at their own discretion, because the topics of abuse are very sensitive. And so if you feel like the topic just might trigger you or make you feel uncomfortable, you just have to turn the show off. No problem. You won't be hurting my feelings at all. And you have to know what's good for you to listen to, right? So if you think it's just going to make you feel down, or you're not strong enough to listen to it, as a survivor on your healing journey, you can just turn the show off. You can always come back and listen to the archives, right? When you're feeling stronger, or maybe you have somebody there with you to listen, and I think that's a good idea. And also, young people under the age of 18, I just ask that you have permission to listen to my shows, because I'm fighting to save children's lives. I'm the Canada Regional Director for Dreamcatchers for Abused Children. I'm going to stand up for children's rights and children's lives until I leave this place, until my last breath will be to fight to save children's lives, and to fight to protect children, fight for children's rights, and stand up for children who have no voice. And so I'm just asking that you protect yourself while you're online, if you're a young person under the age of 18, and make sure that you know what you're doing online, and keep yourself safe, right? It's so important. You want to have someone listen to this show with you, because there's a lot of adult material on my shows, and I just think that I don't know how young the people are who are listening to my shows, right? I don't know where the Blog Talk players are placed around nowadays, and so, because I just don't have any control of that. So if you're a young person, you want to have somebody listen to my shows with you, just so they can help you if you have questions, and, if you're just not sure what I'm talking about, because abuse is just not talked about. And especially abuse issues, surrounding survivors of child abuse, right? Survivor issues, they're not talked about very much, really, in the mainstream. We hardly ever see anything on this. Mainly what we see in the newspaper or on the TV or here on the radio is headlines about children who have been killed or murdered at the hands of their parents, and these come in every day, rolling in every day, or children that are in the hospital or due to abuse, or maybe just being removed from the homes or whatever. But we never hear about survivor issues or how to prevent child abuse or anything like that, right? So that's why I'm doing these shows. So you have to listen at your own discretion, please, and we'll get right on into the topic here. This is from www. Let me get this link for you here. I put it into the chat room. Okay, www.hope4, the number 4, survivors.com/shame.html. And yesterday we left off talking about, excuse me, the dysfunctional family rules, control, perfectionism, blame, denial of the 5 freedoms, which was the power to perceive, the power to think and interpret, the power to feel, the power to desire, to want and choose, the power to imagine, and also the no-talk rule and the don't make mistakes rule and unreliability. And we left off right at this section called abandonment on this page. And this Hope for Survivors was written by a lady, and she calls herself Hope for Us. That's her name, Hope for Us. And she has read John Bradshaw's book. And then what she did was create these web pages based on the information that was in John Bradshaw's book, as well as her own stuff on this, because she's a survivor, and she's you can see on that website, if you scroll down to the bottom, there's information about her and how to contact her, right, and also what she's kind of doing in the future, right. So she's written some really good stuff here, and I think it's very interesting to take a look at. So the next section is called abandonment: physical desertion, emotional abandonment, abandonment through abuse, right? And then she goes on to talk about the sexual abuse, physical abuse, and whatnot, right? So abandonment, physical desertion, it says this is the most commonly understood meaning of the word. This can mean an outright physical separation resulting from a decision not to be involved in your child's life, for example, giving a child up for adoption or letting someone else raise your child. This can also include an undesired absence, which can occur from incarceration, illness, death, or service away from home in the military. Emotional abandonment: children need mirroring from their primary caretakers to develop in a healthy way. And healthy mirroring means that someone is there for the child and reflects an accurate image of who they really are. Shame-based parents are codependent adult children who are still in search of someone who is always there for them. The objects of their narcissistic gratification will often be their own children. In this way, the child takes care of her parents' or his parents' needs instead of the parents taking care of the child's needs. And that's something that I totally relate to, because both of my parents were, I don't know, they just seem to have a lot of these characteristics of codependency and whatnot. It was always all about my mom's needs, and my dad, because he wasn't doing a very good job at trying to help her out, my mom became very bitter about the whole thing, and it all became about her needs and not really anybody else's, right? So this can happen within families, right? And it's the parents' job to take care of the children, not the children's job to take care of the parents. Children, they're not put on the planet just to be, mistreated and made to look after the parents. This is absolutely ridiculous. But we see a lot of this, and I know that it's happening to kids right now. It's been happening since time began, because certain people just will not get help for their issues, right? And they just think, oh, well, they don't even probably realize they're doing it, because they have these children there in the home, and they're so down, and for whatever reasons, whether they're survivors themselves, or they just have all kinds of mental issues, emotional problems and whatnot, right? They just use these children as if these children could solve their problems, right? And the children need that example for them, not the parents. So it's kind of it's bad. Abandonment through abuse. Abuse equals abandonment, because when a child is abused, there is no one there for them. And young children, because of their natural egocentricity, take responsibility for their abuse. It is easier for a young child to believe they are to blame for the abuse than to blame the parents who they rely on for survival. And so I think that's interesting, because John Bradshaw, I guess he wrote in his book that abuse equals abandonment, and I never thought of that. I always thought of abandonment as being, parents who would abandon their children. I actually knew a guy in junior high who was abandoned. He went home from school one day, and his whole family had packed up and moved off and left him, and they just abandoned him. And so that, to me, that's what abandonment meant, and but I guess there's this whole idea that abuse equals abandonment, because when a child's abused, there's no one there for them, right? Especially if if both parents or all caregivers are being abusive and there's not any support for that child, then that young person's going to grow up in a home where there's just no one there for them. And if the siblings are not working together, if there's more than one child in the home and the siblings are pulled apart because of the abuse, then there won't be anybody there to support them within the home. And that's how I grew up, because we were all just trying to survive, right? And so there wasn't anybody pulling together, that's for sure. So this is what can happen to children, right? Even in large families. And even though sometimes, at different times we might have tried to pull together, it never really would stay that way. It wasn't a strong enough bond, right? Because of the situations that were going on in the home all the time. There's always some crazy things going on. So it would change very quickly. The atmosphere and the way people would behave around each other would change very, very quickly, just depending on the day. So one day, my brother might have been supportive towards me, and the next day he'd be slapping me around. See, so there was no committed sort of support, right, from anybody in that home, right? And nobody was supporting anybody in that home. So that's the thing. It's very, very hard to grow up like that. She talks about here sexual abuse. And for John Bradshaw believes that sexual abuse is the most shaming of all abuse, and physical sexual abuse, and overt sexual abuse, talking about that, covert sexual abuse, like verbal, inappropriate sexual talk initiated by an adult, and boundary violation, and that's like involves children witnessing their parents or other adult caretakers involved in sexual behavior. And she writes here, it is the adult's responsibility to set appropriate sexual boundaries. Parents need to close and lock bedroom doors so that children don't accidentally walk in on them, and children need appropriate privacy as well. And if parents or other adults do not respect a child's privacy while they are undressing or using the bathroom, this constitutes a boundary violation. And like our home was full of boundary violations. It was absolutely horrible what was going on there. And nobody had any respect for anybody. There was too many kids in the home. 7 people living in a very small, tiny house, 5 children and 2 adults, right? At any given time, And there used to be, there's 7 siblings, so at one time there was at least 6 children in the home. One of my sisters, by the time I was born, one of my sisters was already moved out and married, because there's 18 years in between us. She got married right away. Like when she hit 18, man, she was gone. Actually, like 17, because she needed to get out of that house, right? So she got married, and not that she didn't love her husband, because I'm sure she did, and I know she did. And so she married this man that she had been seeing, and she was out of the home before I was even born. So see, I didn't realize she was even my sister until I was about 5 years old, right? She would come around with her 2 sons, my nephews, and I thought she was a neighbor. I didn't even know she was my sister, right? But there was 6 people in now, 6 children and 2 adults in the home. We lived in a very small house, and so you want to talk about lack of privacy. There was no privacy, and boundaries as far as, parents just, not respecting your privacy as far as opening bathroom doors, or, people waltzing in, or, there was just no privacy whatsoever, and especially when you have somebody who's mentally ill, and my dad is borderline schizophrenic, so he's quite often running around the house sort of nude, and, coming in the bathroom when you're having a shower sort of thing, especially when you're a young girl and you're just hitting puberty, right, and you're very sensitive about your body, and you need your privacy, right, and then there'd be your dad, this happened to me, where my dad would be open the door and just ogle, and so that's why it used to bother me, you know what I mean? I thought maybe he was my molester. See, I always kind of thought in the back of my mind that he was my molester, until my brother said something to me that changed my mind on that. And so, boundary violations, man, are huge within abusive families. And we have to learn how to set those boundaries. There's all kinds of healthy boundaries that we need. If we didn't grow up, with these healthy boundaries, and we just didn't know that they actually exist, it's a good idea to do some boundary work and start learning how to set some boundaries. And I did some of that with it last year, looking at a website, the Child Abuse Monument, Child Abuse Survivor Monument website. That's www.irvingstudios.com. You can get Michael C. Irving is a psychotherapist. He's a sculptor. He created this Child Abuse Survivor Monument up here in Toronto, Canada. It's awesome. The website's awesome. All you have to do is type into your browser Child Abuse Survivor Monument. It will come up. Well, on his website, if you go check it out, it's just amazing. It's just awesome what he's done. He's a survivor himself of child abuse, and he's devoted his whole life to helping survivors of child abuse, right? And so the website's great, but on it there's some great coping lists. So I was looking through these coping lists and really looking at the boundaries and how, becoming aware that if we didn't learn how to properly set boundaries as children because there was no boundaries when we were growing up, or boundaries were being violated, right? Then we do need to work on that as adults to be sure to know what we're going to allow people to do to us, how we're going to let people treat us in our lives, and how close we're going to let people in. You know what I mean? This is all boundary work, and if you grew up in a home where there was just no normal boundaries, it's a good idea to do some work on the boundaries, right? Emotional sexual abuse is another one. When a parent or other adult, relative, or caretaker bonds in an inappropriate way with a child, it can constitute emotional sexual abuse. It says when a parent uses a child to meet their emotional needs, it can easily become romanticized or sexualized. For example, a daughter can become daddy's little princess, or a son can become mommy's little man. Children need parental guidance. They should not be treated as emotional equals like a spouse. And isn't that the truth? And I see too many people, I've seen too many survivors and too many people out there whose parents just kind of put them in the role of the husband, And my mom almost did that with me, except for it wasn't sexual. But what she did was, I was the last child at home, so she was really relying on me to sort of stick around and take care of her needs because she didn't want my dad touching her. My dad was... he's an abusive man, and he did not love her at all, and he treated her so badly, and he forced her to go crazy, and then of course she would lash out at him and at the rest of the family, right? She was already not doing well when they got married because she was abused as a child and abused her whole life, right? So she wasn't doing well before they even met, and then to marry this man who was abusive too just pushed her over the edge as far as her sanity went, and the crazy stuff that went on in our home also threw her off. But the thing is she should have gotten help, right? But she didn't, and she didn't get out. She should have just gone. We all tried to talk her into leaving and just going to get her own place, and we could go with her or just not, right? Just for her own peace of mind, so that she could learn to heal and to have a good life. But she wouldn't do it. But anyway, she kind of used me in place of my dad, not for sexual purposes, but for her needs, like whatever it was she needed, whether it was emotional support, that type of thing. And it's not like she wasn't abusive towards me. My mom was my main abuser, but the thing is she would sort of, in order to it's kind of bizarre how that happened, right? I would take her to her daughter. Like once I learned how to drive, even after my parents abused me the way that they did, I continued to stay in the home because as a young person, especially 17, 18 years old, I had already witnessed my dad rape my mom when I was a young kid, right? So I knew my dad was attempting to rape my mom, and I knew that he had raped her, and I had witnessed it. And I knew that he was still continuing to try to rape her. She was not capable of having sexual relations. She was very sick. She had so many health problems. And so she didn't want him touching her because he was her abuser, see. So she would keep me around, She'd be like, "Oh, you can stay in the home," because she knew I would protect her, see. She knew that because I had already protected her before because I had taken a bat to my dad's head. With my pink plastic bat, but it was my gigantic pink plastic bat that I went after my dad with. And paid dearly for, let me tell you. But the thing is, I was willing to protect her at all costs, even against, my own life. I was putting my own life into my own hands. And I do that when I went after him because I thought, well, he could kill me, but he threatens to kill me anyway, so it doesn't really matter, does it? And so, I was just a little kid, so she knew I would stand up for her, right? So she kept me around there just because she knew that if I heard my dad harassing her, I'd be in there to stop it, and that's what I did. I played referee until I moved to Canada, which was I was 29 years old. And people would say, "Why did you do that?" The whole emotional, psychological stuff is so absolutely crazy that goes on with people, with parents and children who they've abused and then sort of turned into their ally. Like my mom was my main abuser. She was horrible towards me, and yet, we developed a very dysfunctional relationship where we actually coincided quite well together. You know what I mean? As long as she was not verbally abusing me, because I mean she got to the point where she couldn't physically abuse anyone. You know what I mean? Like I mean she was old and sick. You know, by the time I hit 18, she was 38 when she had me. She would have been 56. No, yes, 56 years old. Yeah. So you know, by the time I hit 20, she was 58. By the time I hit 30, that's 68. So see, she was almost 60 years old by the time I hit 20, right? And her abusive, you know, violent behavior was done. I mean, you know, she could have still thrown stuff, but she couldn't really do much. She was very sick and she was on oxygen by that time. So all of, you know, the main physical abuse was all before the age of 17, pretty much. But the thing is, you know, I stuck around because I really cared about my mom. People would say, well, how could you do that? You know what I mean? Like, especially if that's your main abuser. And it's like, well, because when you see what happens to your mom and you see you know, no one else is standing up to protect her and all the brothers are gone because they had to leave the country or they're dead. And then one sister doesn't really care because she's got her own life going and she's got herself okay, so she's off and married, right? And then the other sister's gone and married, so nobody cares that that dad is still trying to force himself on your mother, which is rape, by the way. I hope everybody knows this. If it's not consensual, it's rape, right? So just so that everybody knows that, right? Not too many people might realize that. Marital rape, it's a serious problem, and especially for my mom. She was so sick, you know, she couldn't, and she didn't want this man touching her. He raped her repeatedly. He was a rapist. And he still is. He still lives today. The thing is I had to do some forgiveness work in order to move on in my life, right? Because otherwise I would have just continued to hold this rage and this hatred in my heart for these two people, right? Which I didn't want to do because it was killing me. I mean, I had to let that go for myself, not for them. You know, I had to change that into something positive, and and that was love, compassion, and mercy, and goodness and kindness. Because I realized that other stuff was killing me inside. It was killing my spirit had already been killed when I was a child. I needed to get that love in there. I needed to push away that hatred and that whole negative stuff, you know, regarding my whole life, and to let the good stuff come in, you know. And truth is included in that. You know, if you want to live a lie, it doesn't do any good to live in a lie, right? And that's where most of my family's at right now. But the thing is, you know, I stayed for many reasons, and mainly to protect my mom. And people would say, well, that's kind of a martyrish attitude, isn't it? And it's like, well, I loved her very much. And also, it allowed me to feel like she appreciated what I was doing, because she used to tell me that she appreciated me staying. She knew I was giving up a large portion of my life. You know, I would do things on my own. You know, I was very much a separate person from them. But I was just there at night to make sure that my dad was not going to try to force himself on her. So I never slept very well for years. You know, as a matter of fact, the whole time I was with them, I didn't sleep very well because they were just abusive people, right? And people would say, well, that was your mother's responsibility. She should have got help, and you're absolutely right. But this is what happens to children when they are being used as that other person, daddy's little princess, mommy's little man, or mommy's good girl staying around to help, right? But do I regret it? Actually, no, I really don't. I wish my mom would have got help. I used to actually regret it. I used to be mad about it, because then when I was 30, my mom told me we had a sort of a blow up, and she told me that she did not want any of us, and I told her, I said, we have to count for something. You know, she was talking about committing suicide. She was very sick, and this was about a year and a half before she actually died and passed away. But you know, she was just like so down, and she said, I just never wanted any of you. You were not worth anything to me. And I said, you've got to be kidding me. Here I am sitting here at the age of 29, and after living a whole life of abuse with you, and then saving your ass from dad, you know what I mean, and putting up with abuse from that man as a child because I was trying to save you, then to go on to be your caregiver, which would be to take you to your doctor appointments, which was 2-3 times a week because she was so sick. You know, I was always running her to the doctor. Getting her to the hospital, taking care of all of her needs, doing a lot of the work around the house, the groceries, the cooking, I mean, you name it. You know, I had sort of taken over because she couldn't do it anymore. And so, you know, I thought that should count for something. I said, your children should count for something because we all loved you very much. I sat there, I told her this at the age of 29. And she told me, she says, well, I didn't want any of you. I did not love any of you. I didn't, I wanted to be an artist. I did not want children. And I said, so you put us through this for nothing? I was like, you got to be kidding me. You had a chance to let us go when the courts, were going to remove us from the home, and you begged and pleaded for them to keep us in the home, and then you went on to abuse us, and me especially, and treat me like garbage, and now you're going to tell me that you did not want any of us and we were worth nothing to you? I mean, it blew my mind, and I tell you, I left for Canada right shortly after that. I left their lives for good. I was just like, bye-bye, goodbye, right? Talk about devastated. I had spent the last the last 12 years of my life there trying to look after this woman, to find out that she didn't appreciate one bit of it. And so, for a while I was pretty hurt about that. It was very, very damaging to me. And after she passed away, I had about a year that I needed to mourn and grieve and just allow myself to let some of these feelings come out. So I was on my own for a year after that. And it's probably a good thing, because I needed that space. I needed my own head space, And so, yeah, it's just crazy what people do to their children, and absolutely horrible. And so that's why sometimes people will do that, because, the parents use their children in place of the other parent, whether it's in place of their husband or wife, right? And it doesn't have to even be sexual, but it can be. But sometimes it is, and obviously, and that's the sad part. But sometimes it's not sexual, it's just that they just use them in place of the other parent to get their needs met. And that's that whole boundary thing and codependency and all that. And so many children have had to deal with this, right? Absolutely horrible. It says physical abuse. This is the second part of this part. And I think what we'll have to do is, we'll go through this one. Bradshaw believes that physical abuse is second only to sexual abuse in the amount and severity of toxic shame it produces. Physical violence can take many forms, such as physical spankings and beatings, being forced to get your own weapon of punishment, torturing, and he just goes through and lists this all here. Physical spankings, beatings, belts, wooden spoons, hairbrushes, hangers, switches, etc., punching, slapping, pulling, pushing, choking, kicking, pinching, biting, shaking, tickling to a torturous degree, being tied up, scratching, attempted drowning, burning with lit cigarettes, lighters, ovens, matches, etc., being sat on, having things thrown at you. Now, I've pretty much experienced almost all of that. I would just about all of that. Having liquids wiped or poured or splattered on you, being forced to breathe toxic chemicals. Now, that I didn't have. Having things forced inside your mouth, for instance, or your throat, like soap, alcohol, or other toxic liquids. I did have soap in the mouth. Having things forced inside your vagina or rectum, like carrots, candles, knives, etc. Being threatened with violence. Now, that I did not have, thank God. Being threatened with violence or abandonment. Not that I can remember. See, I'm missing a little bit there. Being threatened with violence or abandonment. Being threatened to be taken away by the police or men in white coats. Witnessing violence done to a parent or sibling. So most of that I actually have experienced, and that's just a bad way for a child to grow up. And if you want to read my book, I write my story as a blog, Not So Fond Memories Growing Up in an Abusive Home. Last October, started writing this blog chapter by chapter. Donna Shear and Sandra Potter from Dreamcatchers for Abused Children saw this, and they said, you should get that published. It should be a book for people because it could be very helpful for survivors. I hope you will pick up a copy. It's called A Life of Death, The Redemption. You can find it on my show page here on Blog Talk Radio, or it's at lulu.com under Memoirs and Biographies. It's called A Life of Death, The Redemption. And all the proceeds from that book are going to Dreamcatchers for Abused Children to stop child abuse. I did not want that money to pay my rent or buy groceries with. That book is paid for, with a lot of tears and sorrow and sadness and blood, man. I'm telling you, it's that book has been paid for a long, long time ago. I don't want the money for that book. What I want the book to do is to create awareness and prevention, and for other survivors out there to know that there is hope, and that, we just got to keep reaching out. We have about a minute left, so we'll continue on with this article on Monday, finish off the rest of it here. Take care of yourselves. Make sure you do reach out, Don't suffer in silence. And if you're having a hard time, get a hold of somebody. Call somebody. Even if you have to call a crisis line. These crisis line people are probably people just like you and me who have been there. They've experienced it. They know about it. They're trained, first of all, on how to help people, right? and they're good. They're there to listen. That's what they do. They want to help people. So if you're having a hard time and you just don't have anybody to talk to, and you want to remain anonymous, call a crisis line. It's just so important that we don't suffer alone, suffer on our own, right? It's just so important. So have a great weekend, everybody. Take good care of yourselves, and I'll be back on tonight. You can check my show page, and I'll be on Dreamcatchers Talk Radio tonight too, 10 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And also Monday night we have Dina Dixon. She's a survivor. She's also she works with domestic violence and abuse prevention. She's an awesome lady, and she'll be on Dreamcatchers Talk Radio Monday night, 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Check out that as well. So have a great weekend, everybody, and we'll be talking to you real soon. Take care, okay? Bye-bye.